I'm about to crash out in a way I never thought I would. I need to talk about something very important to me, something near and dear to my heart. My iPhone. I love iOS in so many ways. I used to be such an Android fanboy. I never thought I would see the day that iOS was my preference. And it still is, and it probably will be for the foreseeable future, which is why what I'm about to say hurts so deeply. iOS is holding back the entirety of software, not just for iPhone users, but for everybody. Apple's been doing this for a bit, but not in ways that necessarily hurt as much as they do now. But in a world where AI is as powerful as it is, where building things has never been easier to do, a platform that goes out of its way to be as hard as possible to get anything done with, a platform that prevents us from experimenting, trying new things, and building what the future could be, a platform that doesn't even let you install apps unless Tim Cook himself thinks the category is valid, it's destroying us. And it's not just destroying the iPhone platform either, as I genuinely love my Pixel Fold, except for all the things that it's held back on, which are also Apple's fault. And don't even get me started on the iPad. This is the single device that should have changed computing forever that instead just pisses me off every time I open it. And it's because Apple's an evil company. They're just the worst. I have a lot to say. I have had so many stupid moments with Apple stuff recently, especially with our attempts to build and ship the new T3 Chat and T3 Code apps, that I feel like I'm going mad. I cannot believe this company operates the way they do today and that people aren't realizing just how destructive it is. I thought I might be the only one going insane here, so I asked GPT-5.5 to look at my bullet point list and add some ideas of its own, to which it added over 30. 40 points that it added, on top of the ones I already had on the list. Are you kidding? I have to crash out. This one's going to be long. I'm sorry. I genuinely am. But if I'm going to survive the hellish process of getting these apps deployed, I need to complain a lot. And if I'm going to make this worth it, we have to take a quick break for something that sucks a lot less. Today's sponsor. In my opinion, there's 3 ways to evaluate a given product or company. There is how important is the problem that it solves, there is how good is the solution they came up with, and most importantly, there's the quality of the team. I bring this up because today's sponsor is General Translation, and I think they're killing it in all of those fronts. Having your app in every language and localization is great because 85% of the world doesn't speak English. Their SDK and platform are one of the best solutions I've ever seen because normally you have to make your code base way harder to work in for both you and your agents in order to handle localization. Their SDK makes it trivial. Most importantly here is the team, and I'm not saying this because they pay me. You cannot pay me to say this. I love the General Translation team. I've done many a call with the founder because I just like him a lot, and I go to hang out at their office all the time because they're fun to hang out with. These guys understand. They're quickly building a ton of trust in the space, which is why everyone from Cursor to Partiful to ClickHouse to Mintlify and Ramp are all building on top of General Translation. When they hit me up about sponsoring, I went to look at the platform and immediately begged them to let me invest because this is the right way to handle translations. It's a simple T component that you wrap your JSX with. If you need to pass variables in, you can wrap it with their var component. If you need to handle currency translations, you can pass in their currency component. You can set it up with one command and let your agent handle the rest, and going forward, everyone can use your site. If you're only serving English users, fix it today at soydev.link/GT. In order for me to properly explain why iOS is holding us back, I want to build a framework for understanding software first. Roughly speaking, you can categorize software in a few ways. The ones I want to focus on are importance, cost, and capability. And I want to be very clear, these 3 are not inherently tied. Software can be very important and also very cheap. Software can be very capable and not very important. I'm looking at you, Arch Linux people. Software can be incredibly expensive and not important nor capable. These are 3 different things, and all of them need to be thought about when we think about software and mobile. We also need to think a bit about the world when the iPhone came out. The iPhone came out in a world of sidekicks, a world of Blackberries, a world of flip phones, a world of portable devices where the software wasn't very good. It wasn't very important. It was too expensive to make good software, so everybody just made it cheap. And the capabilities were basically non-existent. The best thing you could have on your phone was a shitty port of a Tony Hawk Game Boy game. The software on phones wasn't very good. The iPhone changed that. It made it possible to make way more important software and way more capable software. But it also inherently kind of increased the cost of making software because iOS development was harder than yet another shitty Java applet. but the cost increase was reasonable considering how much more important and capable the software was. There was a catch, though. That's not how it started.
The iPhone ships on June 29th. That is just 18 days from today. I believe at 6 p.m. in the evening they will go on sale. June 29th, 18 days from today. Now, what about developers? What about developers? We have been trying to come up with a solution to expand the capabilities of iPhone by letting developers write great apps for it and yet keep the iPhone reliable and secure. And we've come up with a very sweet solution. And let me tell you about it. So, we've got an innovative new way to create applications for mobile devices. Really innovative. And it's all based on the fact that iPhone has the full Safari inside it. The full Safari engine is inside of iPhone. And it gives us tremendous capability, more than has ever been in a mobile device to this date.
I will interrupt here to say this is a true point at the time. Before the iPhone came out, the power of these types of mobile devices was way less. The capabilities, the freedom, the things you could do on it was inherently way smaller. And Safari on iOS, as silly as it is to say this way, was more capable than the Java applets on almost every other phone. But notice that he's not saying anything about native here, because that wasn't the plan when the iPhone first came out. I'll let Steve continue.
You can write amazing Web 2.0 and AJAX apps that look exactly and behave exactly like apps on the iPhone. And these apps can integrate perfectly with iPhone services. They can make a call. They can send an email. They can look up a location on Google Maps. After you write them, you have instant distribution. You don't have to worry about distribution. Just put them on your internet server. And they're really easy to update. Just change the code on your own server rather than having to go through this really complex update process. And they're secure with the same kind of security you'd use for transactions with Amazon or a bank. And they run securely on the iPhone so that they don't compromise its reliability or security. And guess what? There's no SDK that you need. You've got everything you need if you know how to write apps using the most modern web standards to write amazing apps for the iPhone today. You can go live on June 29th. And we'd like to show you an example of the kind of apps that you can write starting today.
Do you understand just how far we have fallen? The number of points here, like this, no SDK required, that's how it should have been. In the jump from where mobile development was before the iPhone to what was promised here was genuinely massive, which is why it hurts so much that it has regressed since. Starting with the release of the App Store, the capabilities of the mobile devices we use every day have gone down year over year, not up. And I will be frank, as much as I prefer Tim Cook to Steve Jobs, I think this is one of the few things that Steve Jobs would have possibly gotten right that Tim Cook, the person trying to maximize every penny Apple makes, has gotten entirely fucking wrong and has possibly doomed the direction of software as a whole as a result. And a lot of this changed because of the nature of the bet that was being made. At the time, the iPhone was the underdog. They had to convince developers to build for it, so it had to be as easy as possible to build. And they had to convince users to get it because they had 0% market share because the phone didn't exist yet. They had to climb through the market to make this device popular. And they did everything right from the start because it was the only option they had. And then they started to get some serious market share. And then they started to behave like absolute shit. The harsh reality is that Apple has their market share, so they don't care anymore. They just don't. Every single time an app is purchased on the App Store, Apple makes 30%. Every single time you buy a digital good in an app, whether you're buying an ebook, you're renting a movie, you're buying a cosmetic in a game, you're paying for an indie developer's fun map in a game that you're playing, Apple gets 30% of all of that too. Apple gets their percentage. They have no interest in anything that harms their percentage. And as such, they have no interest in things that make developers' lives easier because you're stuck building for the iPhone anyways. Apple doesn't have to compete on developer experience because if you want to make money and you want to make a mobile app, you have to support Apple. While Apple has less than 20% of market share globally, they have over 60% of money spent on mobile phones. The vast majority of money being spent on a phone is spent on iPhones. So if you are looking at the split of devices sold and think Apple is the wrong bet as an app manufacturer, you just don't understand the finances behind it. Apple has an absurd monopoly on money spent on mobile. People in my chat have worked at companies that were doing $100+ million a year on their mobile apps, and iOS would push 60 to 70% of that money spent on iOS. It's insane. What I'm trying to say is that Apple will make their money regardless, so what they do instead is the bare minimum, the absolute bare minimum. And I want to show you guys a little bit of what that looks like, both through things that have happened over the last few years and also through my own personal experience trying to build apps. I'll be real and I'll start with one I was crashing out about over the weekend, which inspired me to make this video. I want to talk about my iPad. I could talk a lot about how we should be able to build iPad apps on iPads. I could talk a lot about how I should be able to do a bunch of custom shit on here. I can talk a lot about how the OS is gimping this incredible piece of hardware, but I'm not. As much as I want to talk about those things, that's not what I'm here to talk about today. I'm here to talk about the absolute insanity that is the fact that I was making changes to my team's mobile app. And I made those changes and I verified them on my phone because my phone was already attached to my Apple developer account. My iPad wasn't. So I connected my iPad to my computer. It auto-populated with the Apple provisioning, whatever the hell. And then it got put in a pending state where it would proceed to stay for 36 hours. I was not able to use the MacBook I purchased to install the app I built on the iPad I purchased because Apple hadn't given me the thumbs up yet. What the fuck? That's some 1984 level shit, if I'm being real. Like, I still cannot process the fact that I had software I had paid a team to build, and I had built with the team, that I couldn't put on one of my devices because Apple didn't want me to yet. They wanted to go through their process of verifying because if I had found a way to get the app without their permission, that could harm their app store. Sorry, that could be insecure, and they don't want us getting viruses. No, that's not what they actually want. They want to lock us in because they want to make sure there is no path to app installs that isn't their app store because then they might lose some money. And they're being fucking evil about it. And that is just one of the many things I'm about to crash out about. Do not worry, we have a long ways to go. This is actually a very fun point, Taka. Thank you for bringing this one up. During the Epic versus Apple trial, it was revealed that Apple makes more money on games than Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo and Activision combined because they get the 30% of all money spent on mobile games. Insane. Actually insane. A company that's never made a game makes billions on games because they have an entry tax. I'm going to crash out about Xcode in a bit, but I want to first crash out about the signing bullshit. As I mentioned before, despite paying the $100 a year fee and buying multiple Apple devices and building the app on Apple devices, I could not test the app on my iPad until waiting a certain amount of time for Apple to do the approval. Actually insane. Oh, but Theo, what about Test Flight? Did you know Test Flight requires you to go through the full app review process? I can't use Test Flight as a way to get around Apple's stuff because you still have to go through it. At first, we should just take a moment to appreciate how insane it is that you have to use a Mac to build apps. Like, the exceptions to this rule involve the app being built on someone else's Mac in the cloud. That's insane. There is no way to build an app on your iPad or your iPhone without a Mac. It's one of the reasons I'm stuck still using a Mac, despite the fact that I do genuinely want to make the move to Linux. That's just one of the pieces. It gets a lot worse. For example, when you're doing the signed app process through the computer, you need to make sure your devices connect to that computer at least once every 7 days or the app will stop opening. Apple needs to know that your app is signed by a developer. And I'm going to crash out about that process a lot in a bit. You know what? I'll put a little more about that here, because for some reason, they have you hard code the credential for signing the app in the info plist file, which for the most part is a manifest for the app and the permissions it needs, but it also just so happens to include the account and the team that it's attached to in the code directly, which makes doing anything with a platform like, I don't know, Git obnoxious, because a portion of that file is specific to your developer account. The fact that the Xcode ecosystem was built pre-Git is its own problem. The fact that it still operates with a pre-Git mindset is the real issue, though. It just sucks so hard to do anything with any of this. If you built with any even vaguely modern set of tools, like any web app or Electron, or even just React Native, the traditional blessed way with Expo, you get shielded from a lot of the hell that I'm talking about here, because it is absolutely hellish. And having built a lot of things for a lot of platforms, the absolute shit show that is iOS development is so hard for me to fathom. And here's where I'm going to get a little spicier. This absolute bullshit policy is hostile to experimentation, to people who want to try out new ideas and experiment with things and do something no one's done before. The people who want to invent the future should be encouraged to do so, not locked out of doing so, not restricted by these layers upon layers of rules and fees and processes and hardware ownership to even get to the point where you're allowed to start. It's hostile to open source, because if somebody open sources their app and I want to make some changes and play with it, it doesn't matter that the app's already been approved. I have to go through the whole process again myself, and I have to modify a bunch of things that could accidentally get checked in when I'm trying to make a PR, because you have to do that in order to even be able to build in the first place. After you already paid the hostage fee, by the way, and also making sure that you check in with your device plugged into your computer every 7 days so the app doesn't get locked out. But most importantly, and this is the part I really want to emphasize, as an Apple fan myself, it's hostile towards me. It was easier for me to build custom versions of Android for my Android phone than it was for me to start my first app on my iPhone. And it's somehow gotten worse over time, not better. When I finally got my iPad approved, by the way, I still couldn't build to it because I got an obscure error telling me that there's some new agreement I have to go find in a hidden dashboard somewhere before I'm allowed to sign my devices again. So I had to go to the developer.apple.com. It redirected me to the wrong place twice. I finally signed in. It redirected me to apple.com. I went back to developer.apple.com. And this time I actually stayed off. So developer.apple.com had me signed in. And I had to scour through the page to find this weird banner that was basically impossible to see because there was 5 more above and below it. But this one particular banner had a button in it that would bring me to a page that had this new agreement they just put out during the most recent WWDC that I had to hit approve on, and then wait another 20 to 30 minutes for that provisioning and that approval to get updated on Apple's servers so that I was allowed to build the app I made from my Mac to my fucking iPad. Are you kidding? It is genuinely insane that I can't just build the app I made on my iPad that I own. It's like orders of magnitude away from where it should be. We'll come back to this later because I want to talk about the beautiful world we could live in if Apple just got over their shit. I realize this will go on forever if I don't break up the topic, so I just did it here. I'm going to rant about the sandboxing, Xcode being absolute fucking garbage, the App Store policies that hold us back from ever having great innovative software again, the fact that AI can never be good on iOS because of Apple's bullshit, and a tangent on how Android doesn't help us at all here. So let's start with the sandboxing, because I have a lot to say here. Let me just think of some examples. Why can't my app send messages to each other? They can, but the way it sends a message isn't through iOS. There is literally no way for apps to communicate without you doing it on your own external server. You can share through Apple's share feature between apps. Good luck implementing that in a way that makes any sense at fucking all. It's hell. Beyond that, why can't I customize my apps? Why can I not control the apps at all? Why can't I force an app to stay in dark mode? Why can't I have an agent change the first screen in an app? Why can't I limit the way an app works for my business so when people are on our sandboxed phones that have like the developer credentials on them that are built in a way for my network and for my company, why can't I make slight changes to an app? Obviously, there should be some level of restriction and control here, but I can install a Chrome extension that changes anything I want about a website. I can force everyone at my company to have that extension installed. Why is there literally nothing at all like this for iOS? I'll give you a hint. Part of it's because JIT doesn't work. Just-in-time compilers, things that will make your code more efficient for the processor when the code appears in the app, are not allowed at all, because you're not allowed to do any dynamic execution in iOS apps. Even React Native, the way it is built, is on the line for what is or isn't allowed, because Apple doesn't want you doing things on the fly. This kills a lot of shit. This makes good performant game emulators nearly impossible, because you need to do some specific compilation like shader stuff for given games. But if you are updating the way the code executes on the fly, hard ban from Apple. We'll never get good emulators on iOS, even though Apple did loosen their restrictions on the concept of emulators. We'll never have performant ones because Apple won't let us. But most importantly, why can't my app install apps? Why can't my app build apps? Why can't my app customize apps? Why can't my app do anything Apple doesn't want us to? It's because Apple doesn't care. They don't benefit meaningfully from allowing us to do these things, but they are potentially risking reviews being harder or the app store getting less traffic. On that note, why can't I use a different browser engine? On my Mac right here, I have a shitload of different browsers installed. I have Zen, which is based on Firefox and Gecko. I have Helium, which is based on Chromium. And begrudgingly, I have Safari because it comes with the Mac and Apple won't let me uninstall it. On your phone, you might have Chrome installed, but that's not using the Chrome engine. That is just using WebKit because Apple only lets you use WebKit on iOS. It's insane. All of these restrictions prevent us from having whole categories of potential awesome software. It means I can't have a good Windows emulator on my iPad. It means I can't have a good GameCube emulator on my iPhone. It means I can't build a new language with its own compiler and then play with it on my Apple devices. It means I can't try to make a browser engine with more capabilities than Apple wants it to have. It means I can't do anything fucking interesting because Apple's already restricted all the interesting stuff. I can't build my own ecosystem of apps that have their own relationships with each other because I have to go build a backend to share anything between them because Apple won't let you. On that note, there's one whole category of things that aren't allowed due to the way Apple sandboxes. Plugins. One of the coolest things you can do in software is modify it. I can install an extension in Chrome that changes how a website works. I can install extensions in VS Code that change how it works. I can install extensions in Safari even. But you cannot make software that has extensions. Apple just doesn't really allow it. There are some hacks here and there, but you can't really do it. Apple doesn't want software to be extendable. They want software to be sold by them to make them money. That's all they want. And they will hold us back every single fucking day, preventing cool new ideas from ever happening because it's just slightly easier for them to review. Insanity. The amount of things that could have happened if sandboxing wasn't so restrictive is incredible. But even if they fixed all that, we still won't be able to do shit because Xcode is shit and the App Store policy is even more shit. We're a little closer to the App Store policy thing here, so I'm going to start with that. We'll go to Xcode after. Because the App Store policies are so bad that they deserve to lose every single court case that they've already been losing, and their malicious compliance with the rulings is somehow even more egregious. Here's a fun fact. The only way to install an app on your phone that wasn't signed by you or a team you're in with your device ID hard-coded to it is to go through the App Store or to go through TestFlight. There is no path from my app to your phone that isn't App Store or TestFlight, both of which require Apple to approve it. Which means if you happen to be building any of the things Apple doesn't want you to build, you have no choice. You are just screwed. Just to go through a handful of these categories, some have maintained the ban, some have had their ban status changed. Streaming videos, streaming music, totally fine. Apple's okay with that. Streaming games, nope, not allowed. This is a whole category of software that could have been revolutionary that is entirely impossible because Apple didn't want it to exist. Let's say that your app only has auth for your enterprise SAML, like you're a Google or a Microsoft company and everyone signs in through that. Apple has a hard rule that requires any sign-in methods that are provided through another auth layer, whether it's Google, Microsoft, whatever else, require that sign in with Apple is also an option. Doesn't matter if it's 0% of your users, doesn't matter if you hard restrict them and not being able to do anything in the app, you have to have that button or Apple won't approve. Period. Speaking of which, external payment systems, let's say you built a game that has a credit system in it, like Fortnite, and you have V-Bucks in it. You bought a bunch of V-Bucks on the computer version, and then you go to play it on the phone. If you don't have a way to buy V-Bucks in the phone app, they ban you. If they let you keep using the credit card you already linked to your account, they ban you. You have to implement Apple Pay and give them their 30%. It is required. It is a rule, and if you don't do it, you'll be banned. And if you don't like it, I hope you have good lawyers because you will see them in court. There's an unless on this one, though. If your app is selling services or physical goods, you can get by. And when I say services, I mean in-person things, like an Uber driver that's going to drive you from one place to another, or a DoorDasher bringing you food, or a TaskRabbit hanging up a TV. Those don't have to have the 30%. Those can be a perfectly flat zero, and Apple doesn't do anything about it. They require you to enable Apple Pay as an option, but they won't take a percentage. So your options are 30% if Apple doesn't like your category, or 0% if you're in the blessed section that they allow. They also, fun fact, had an exception for video streaming subscription services because Amazon threatened to pull all Apple products out of Amazon.com and also pull all of their apps out of the App Store, including the Amazon app, if Apple was going to enforce the 30% on Amazon Prime for people doing Prime Video. And this is why Apple introduced the Apple Video Partner Program to allow premium subscription video providers to participate in new TV watching experiences, also to get a slightly lower cut. Getting into this program drops your cut from 30% to Apple to 15% to Apple. And one company has ever in history become part of it, and it's fucking Amazon. It's insane. This should have been its own lawsuit. This should have been a class action. This should have torn them to shreds. The number of these types of bullshit things they do, where they put out this whole fake video partner program thing, literally just to skirt the law. Insane. There are so many categories of apps that have been made nearly impossible or entirely impossible thanks to Apple. Even something like Twitch, where I'm currently live streaming myself recording, Twitch takes 15 to 50% of the revenue for subscriptions. Usually it's 30 to 50%. In order for Twitch to justify that, they have to provide an entire platform and experience where I and my audience can interact. They have to eat a ton of costs for video streaming, and they get 30% when somebody pays me $5. If Apple also got 30% for just happening to be the place the app was installed on, I'm left with 40% of that transaction. And don't get me started on something like Patreon, where Patreon takes 5 to 15% and Apple hard enforces their 30%. That means that platforms that want to make it easier for people to support creators like me don't make any sense at all because Apple will take a hostage fee. If I wanted to, out of the goodness of my heart, create a platform that only takes 3% because that's what Stripe effectively charges, and let you donate to somebody without me getting any money, just like a charitable thing. If I built like a GoFundMe style app and only took transaction fees and nothing else, Apple would still get 30% of every single transaction. We will never have a GoFundMe app because if we did and you paid through it, Apple would take a fee. And that 30% fee destroys whole categories of potential types of software. Patreon would not be dying as a business if it wasn't for Apple's bullshit. Twitch would still be dying because of their own incompetence, but they would be struggling a lot less if it wasn't for Apple's bullshit. When I was at Twitch, we had to just not allow subscriptions on iOS for a while, and eventually the workaround that we found was selling subs as a currency, where you could buy a subscription for $6.50. It would be cash in your account, and then when you went to click the sub button, it would deduct from that, and that would effectively let you have this tiered system where the $6.50 is where Apple took their 30%, and then what was left was cashed as a thing you could go spend on somebody later. The fact that we had to invent a novel currency on Twitch just to simply comply with Apple's stuff is insane, because they wouldn't let us offer a cheaper version on the site. Horrifying. And don't get me started about recommending people leave the app, because Apple will ban you for that too. In fact, they went back to court and lost twice because of how strictly they were banning this. I have a whole video about Apple's lack of compliance with the Epic Games ruling that I would recommend watching after this if you want to hear even more. Holy fuck. I'm going to stop myself here, even though it's hard, because I haven't even talked about the shit show that is app reviews, where Apple can just randomly, arbitrarily decide that your apps are no longer allowed because of some functionality they approved a year ago, or because you gave instructions on how they can sign into the app and use it, and they didn't read them, and then they yell at you and say, sorry, we can't verify the app, you won't let us use it, you're banned now. And you're like, wait, I literally gave you instructions. And they send you a screenshot where they typoed the fucking email and sign in, which I've had happen 3 separate times. I couldn't ship an update because the reviewer typoed the email address I gave them for a fake sign-in credential. Unfucking believable. Theo from the future, because I remembered one more App Store policy thing. I can't stop myself. This one's important. Scamming kids is their business model. This one hurts. If you don't have kids or friends with kids that you've talked to about these things, you don't know how bad this is. It is incredibly common for kids to install an app that says it's free, that is free, and then randomly a pop-up comes up in it that says you can use this part of this app and it's only $50 a week. And the first 7 days are free. And then it bills weekly from that point forward. And you end up with your kid accidentally setting up subscriptions to the tune of $1,000+ a month. These stories come out all the time. They get international news attention, and Apple doesn't do fucking shit about it. They don't even ban the apps for it. Apple makes a meaningful percentage of their yearly revenue by scamming children. And they're not banning it because they don't want to touch the golden goose. They'll let those kids get scammed. They'll let those parents lose all their money because they make money off of it. They get 30% of every scammed kid's revenue. Why would they ban it? I firmly believe there is not a single weekly subscription service in the App Store that isn't a scam. Apple leaves it in because changing it would hurt their revenue. Apple doesn't ban these apps because banning them would hurt their revenue. Apple doesn't address these problems because they like the revenue more than they like kids having a safe experience on their phones. Crazy that Apple is at that point, but they are. Here's a fun fact. Did you know that Xcode is just Next Step? If you were born in this century, you probably don't know what Next Step is. Did you know that Steve Jobs got fired from Apple and then he went and built his own computer company? And because he knew the fact that Apple's software was such fucking garbage, there was no future in which they could make an actual developer platform, he decided to go the other way. He decided to just build useful software that would make it possible for devs to do real things. Next Step was the object-oriented computing platform. They were trying to make OOP the selling point because the Apple development ecosystem was so bad. Steve Jobs genuinely believed he could sell software, he could sell computers just by marketing it as we don't suck to write code for. And he was right enough because Apple had to buy Next Step. And I have learned this from Apple employees that might even get fired for me mentioning this, but it was long enough ago that I don't remember their names and there's no way the link can be made. The majority of the core of Xcode is still the same Next Step code base that they bought from Steve Jobs when they bought his company. Apple was so far behind that they rebranded Next Step as Xcode and have continued to iterate on it since. The core of Xcode is over 25 years old. Why would we ever expect it to function? Don't worry, though. They added a local model to help with code completion. Fucking die. I cannot believe the state of Xcode. It is not a shock that the software quality of Apple stuff has been going down, that iOS and macOS are getting buggier, because the people building it have to build it in fucking Xcode. I don't know how good of a cake you would expect if they're cooking it on fucking plastic. If you were given like 2 pencils and a ruler and told to build a cake, I wouldn't expect a very good one. But for some reason, Apple thinks Xcode is in a reasonable state and refuses to fix it. Do you have any idea how many times Xcode has crashed because I checked out a different branch? Do you have any idea how many times Xcode has locked up and I had to go purge its entire cache manually to get it to even fucking open again? Do you have any idea how much time is wasted with Xcode rebuilding steps that were absolutely cacheable because they have no concept of progressive build systems? It is easier to build Linux than it is to build an iOS app. It's actually insane. I just wanted to open Xcode to see how long it takes for me to crash it or deal with it again. And it's re-indexing files that haven't changed since I last opened it. It's insane. This is a 128 gig of RAM machine, and Xcode will easily use half or more of it. And then the simulators too. Don't get me fucking started on the simulators. Holy hell. There's a little cloud button now because they let you use Xcode Cloud now because their software is so impossible to fucking use that you're expected to just put it on their cloud instead and pay them money instead. The fact that this is necessary software to build an app is insulting. There is no way to build an app for an iPhone without it going through Xcode in one way, shape, or form. Thankfully, with something like Expo, you can build the native part once, put it on your phone, scan a QR code, and now you can load the dynamic JS from a web server on your computer, which is so much less bad that I could actually get work done on my phone from my phone. Except for the fact that I still have to go phone home every 7 days to plug in the phone and confirm, yeah, I'm allowed to do this. And even better, the Expo bundler that they used to have on the App Store where you could scan a QR code and get work done can no longer be updated because of Apple's hard ban of anything even vaguely vibe coding and app generation related. I don't think we're going to pass our first round of App Store review with T3 code. Even though T3 code doesn't run on the phone, it is just a wrapper that connects to your computer and sends messages to and from the computer. The fact that it is dynamic software might be enough for Apple to ban us. I don't know. I will be sure to report back once we go through the review, which we have to, not because we're shipping the app, but because we want to have access to the app in test flight. The real reason I'm a web dev is because I tried to be a mobile app dev, and Apple made it so goddamn hard that I gave up and learned a new language and platform. I have been avoiding Xcode to the best of my ability for the better part of a decade now, so I'm going to use AI, Apple's least favorite thing, to cite all of the ways it sucks. Incremental builds become slower than clean ones. No code changes can still trigger multi-minute rebuild work. We just saw that in mind. Xcode can spend most of a build on vague phases like planning Swift module. Build times are non-deterministic enough that devs stop trusting the machine. Clean build folder is a religious ritual. Deleting derived data becomes folk medicine. Build errors often disappear after restart, clean, or reopen, which trains devs to debug the tools before debugging code. And you also sometimes can't even see the error. When you click it, it goes to some random file and gives you no context, so even finding the error is obnoxious. Small SwiftUI changes can cause massive type checking work. Swift's type checker is clever in design, horrible in practice. Swift compile errors are sometimes not your code is wrong, rather, the compiler gave up. There's a reason why the guy who designed Swift left and says he regrets it. The classic error, unable to type check this expression in reasonable time, is especially hated because it often points at a broad expression instead of the actual cause. Yep. Professionals have to refactor code not because the design's bad, but because the compiler can't handle the shape of the code anymore. Build performance is extra punishing in SwiftUI because View Builder lets you write code that looks clean but explodes the compiler's complexity. Mixed Objective-C, Swift, C++, SPM, and CocoaPods projects become a build system haunted house. Don't even get me started on the fact that CocoaPods is a third-party Ruby thing that we had to build third-party because Apple has no concept of a module. I'm going to die. Archive builds can behave differently from run builds. So works locally does not mean the shipped artifact works. Okay, I'm going to go back to the CocoaPods thing because fun fact, do you guys know what the guy who made CocoaPods did after trying his hardest to fix iOS dev? He went to Microsoft and became a TypeScript contributor because he wanted to contribute to an ecosystem that cared and actually improved year over year. Imagine any modern tooling not having a way to do packages, and instead of embracing and embedding it, they just ignore it, and then the person who makes it goes to your biggest competitor and works on a different language entirely. The fact that Orda didn't become the head of developer ecosystem at Apple is way funnier to me than the shithead who made Brew not being able to get a job. I know companies whose builds take over a day and a half, and since Apple doesn't really allow for caching and incremental stuff, because as we mentioned before, incremental builds are often longer than the clean ones, there's nothing they can fucking do. Your reward for making big, large software on iOS is you need 15 people to try and keep the build times down, and maybe you'll be able to get your app out in under 2 days. Maybe. Insanity. The indexing is a shit show. It breaks your editor when it's running, and it doesn't function when it's not there yet. SwiftUI previews, chat, do any of you actually use the previews for SwiftUI? Because I've never met a serious iOS dev that bothers. Never worked for me. No. Previews are useless. No previews are shit. Literally not a single person saying yes or sometimes. It is one sometimes now. Everybody else is never or I don't use SwiftUI. Someone said they've stopped even doing SwiftUI. I've done the same. I'm back to AppKit because at least it fucking functions. LLDB is an absolute shit show, so good luck debugging things that aren't just fucking syntax. Oh god, the copy-pasted simulator breaking happens to me at least once or twice a day. It is obnoxious. It's why I stopped using simulator entirely. The simulator needing to be reinstalled, I've had a few times too. I thought I was just doing something wrong. I did not know that was that common. You often have to erase all content and settings. The runtime downloads are massive. Yeah, when I get a new Mac I want to use for iOS dev, I just expect it to not work for the day because it has to download so much bullshit. Multiple simulator versions eat absurd amounts of disk space. Yep. Simulator bugs are different from device bugs. Device bugs are different from simulator bugs. Some things work only on physical devices, some only on simulators, and Apple's docs are not clear about which is which. Testing login, IAP, push, background modes, widgets, app groups, keychain, and entitlements can send you into device simulator mismatch hell. Already been there too. This I ran into today. As of the most recent Xcode 26 build, Mac clipboard paste stopped working in simulator. Users reported that Command V wouldn't do anything and there was no paste option, with one person saying they had to OCR screenshots in order to get the error messages. Yep. Any subset of these bugs, any 5 of them, is enough for me to move off of a piece of software. But instead, we have to deal with thousands of them because we're not allowed to use other choices. There is no other option. We have to use Xcode. So we deal with all of this. Oh, I didn't even get to the Git section yet. Project.pbxproj is the most hated file in professional Apple development, possibly the most hated ever other than DS Store. It's huge, fragile, and not meant to be meaningfully hand-edited. It merge conflicts all the time for basically anything. The project file can fail to open if it's malformed, which means you can't open the project at all to fix things. Diffs are unreadable. The IDE mutates project state in ways that are hard to review. This is something I was talking about earlier. Xcode projects preserve a pre-Git worldview. And rather than fixing it, they are just ignoring it. The fact that Git doesn't work properly with iOS apps is enough to end this. Be like, okay, Apple, fix that, move on. That would be a showstopper by itself, but combined with everything else, it becomes a fucking bullet point. I'm going to drop my hottest take about Xcode, and then we're going to move on from it and talk about the rest. Xcode can never be good because the Xcode team has never experienced good. Xcode developers at Apple have never worked on anything other than Xcode to build Xcode on Apple platforms. Maybe they used Xcode to build an app before, and that's how they got their job. They don't know what good looks like. They don't have a reference. They live in their bubble, their shitty silver bubble, and they never look outside of it because it's fully opaque. They don't know how bad it is because they've never experienced what decent software is, what decent experience building software is. They don't even know. And you know what? I feel bad for them. I genuinely do. These are people that will never love building software because the software they have to build is garbage and the software they used to build it is garbage. To go back to the cooking analogy, I can't imagine somebody becoming a master chef if all they have to cook with is a few matches in a plastic pan. Like, you're just never going to love the thing if the things you have to do it with are trash. Insane. So again, Xcode is engineered from its core and from its team structure to never allow for good software development. Somebody in chat is so deep in the Stockholm syndrome of iOS dev that they sincerely wrote this message. I'm not trying to pick on this person. I just want you guys to understand this is why we have the problem. I'm missing a few important things. While iOS isn't the best experience for devs, it's also not meant for super quick iteration like I expect from web. He's on a team that deploys apps for 20,000 users on the App Store only, no Android or web app, and you just get used to the quirks after a while. You just get used to Git not functioning in iOS projects. You just get used to builds randomly taking hours instead of minutes because the things that cache them don't function properly. You just get used to an app that crashes half the time you're trying to build. You just get used to an ecosystem with no concept of package. You just get used to writing software like we're still in the fucking 90s. You know what? If you want to write software like we're in the 90s, feel free. I'm going to write it like we're in 2026. I've said enough about Xcode. I've said too much about Xcode. I've thought about this piece of software way more than any human should have to. It is insulting that it still exists. And on this note, I want to get a little more existential. Because Apple's absolute bullshit way of running iOS will hold back the future of AI-powered experiences. I hope we've all learned this by now. AI isn't just a thing you stuff into your apps. AI is a thing that changes how you should use your computer. I didn't really have issues with how I navigated my Mac before I started coding with AI, and suddenly the horrible shit show that is workspaces on macOS combined with the less than ideal app hierarchy made me feel like I was going insane, so I started to use Linux more heavily. And it was one of the biggest breaths of fresh air I've ever felt in my life. It felt like I was trapped in a sewer with no light or clean air for my entire life, and all of a sudden I was in the sun with fresh oxygen. But at the very least, we can customize how our OS works a little bit. For example, I am currently voice-to-texting on my Mac using WhisperFlow. It's really good. It has changed part of how I interact with my computer. I have a key on my keyboard that causes another app to trigger, which has an overlay that takes over a small portion of my screen, and then it makes changes to the thing I'm currently in. If it's a text box, it types things out in that text box. That's an OS level change, not in the sense that you have to customize the operating system to do it, but in the sense that it's not just an app that is open and focused like my other apps are. It is a thing that augments how I use the computer. And the harsh reality is that a lot of the best AI experiences we're going to have going forward are going to be things like that. Things that don't just change how the app works, they change how the relationships between our apps and ourselves work. Things like the super powerful computer use primitives that are built into Codex. Codex can use my browser in another window while I'm still using other things on the computer at the same time. Codex is able to use my computer when the screen's off. Codex is able to go to different apps and to do things in them. Codex can use my computer better than I could use my iPhone. And you bet your ass Codex can't use an iPhone. I'm not saying it's easy to do this on other platforms. Automating Windows and macOS is hellish, and Linux is better, but not a lot. But at least we can. We can customize how we use and navigate the platform. People have built everything from different window managers to Spotlight alternatives that are 100 times better. Seriously, Raycast is one of the best things I've ever installed. I'm not even paying for it. It's just worth it. Definitely recommend it. The fact that Spotlight is so slow in comparison is just funny to me. But there are so many of these things, so many of them, that my Mac is barely even a Mac to an extent because I have added all these things that change how it works. I can't do any of that on my iPhone. If it turns out the best use cases for AI are it controlling my device, it navigating my device, it pulling context from different places into one place, customizing how my apps work in different ways, using my apps for me, all these types of things, we'll never know. We'll literally never know because Apple will never let us do it. If it turns out Siri is actually the best place to interact, that holding down a button and getting a voice assistant to come up and then talking to it is the best place, we'll never know because Siri's a fucking joke and we can't use other options. Siri's the only layer into all of these things to the extent that Apple's even willing to expose them. Since it's powered by absolute garbage that might get a little better with the new iOS, we'll never really get to embrace what it's possible. We'll never really get to embrace what it could do. All of the innovation happening in places like Codex and WhisperFlow on desktop cannot happen on iOS. WhisperFlow even has an iOS app, and it's pretty cool considering the restrictions. The way it works is they replace your keyboard with a WhisperFlow keyboard. But since you can't use voice in the keyboard app if you're not the official Apple keyboard, hitting the mic button forwards you over to the WhisperFlow app to turn on the mic. It then becomes a live activity, which is at the top of your phone, and leaves your mic on 24/7 until you go manually turn it off. Or you could use the awful voice to text on built-in Apple keyboard and built-in iPhone and just tap it, talk, and then tap it again, and it gets half the words wrong, but it doesn't leave your mic on. We'll never see how powerful AI could be on a phone because Apple will never let us. Apple will never let us make a better iPhone AI. They'll never let us experiment with new things AI can do on iPhone because they have decided that layer is theirs. We can build apps on our phone, and maybe someday Apple will let those apps interact with the Siri layer that they own and define, but not the other way around. We'll never be allowed to make an app that controls our phone. We'll never be allowed to make an app that can adjust other apps. We'll never be able to make an app that's not even an app. That's just a layer that does things on our device. We'll never be allowed because Apple doesn't care. And this is a whole category of things that we'll just never get to see or experience. I hate to go into what if territory here, but it's hard not to. Imagine a world where things like WhisperFlow could be used on iPhone properly. Imagine a world where something like Codex and its computer use capabilities can work on an iPhone. Imagine a world where if you have an app you're using that could be a little bit better, have a thing changed, and you can talk to your phone and it changes the app for you. We'll never see it. It'll never happen because Apple does not want us to try. Apple wants all innovation on mobile to come from Apple. And you know what? They succeeded because we have to crash out a little about Android. This is a talk from Scott Jensen. He worked on Android at Google. He worked on Canonical and Ubuntu for a while too. It's one of my favorite talks about UX ever. I think about it all the time. But there's a specific quote I want to grab from here about Android that has held true to this day.
Okay, that's what it feels like when you color outside the lines. If you do something that no one else has done before, you're jumping into the trash compactor. But how can we be Princess Leia? We need to be Princess Leia. We need to try some of these more crazy things. And I know it's hard, but how can we do these experiments in such a way that we don't feel like we're taking so much of a risk? Some of my stuff at Google was not shipping, and I was quite frustrated. I talked to a VP about it, and he said something I'll never forget. He goes, "The fastest way to ship your features is to have Apple do it first." Thanks, Mr. Senior Visionary Guy. It was so frustrating but that's why we were copying desktop in the first place, because they took all of the pressure off of us. And yet we have to think more about that. So
you get the idea. Android doesn't bring anything to the table because Android is just Google's attempt at copying iOS. That's all it is. Almost everything we've talked about here, okay, 2/3 of what we talked about here is the case on Android 2, not because Google is greedy or selfish or is trying to maximize their return. It's just because they're copying Apple one for one. Google didn't take 30% of App Store purchases on the Google Play Store because they want to make a bunch of money. They make almost nothing off it. They did that because it's what Apple does. Google doesn't have a complex app review process that gets rejected all the time for even worse reasons than Apple's apps do because they wanted to or because it protects them in some way. There's still way more malware on the Android store than there will ever be on anything Apple's ever made. They do it because Apple does. Google doesn't restrict the OS level controls that your apps can make because they want to, because they're protecting your device. They're doing it because Apple does. Android isn't shit because Google is shit. Okay, it's partially shit because Google is shit. Android is largely shit because iOS is. And it's sad that we live in this world, but we do. The vast majority of the problems I have with iOS still exist with Android. But there's a big difference. My iPhone is still a good phone, and it still has good apps. And I wish that wasn't the case. I wish Google would let us do a little more with Android. I wish they would take advantage of the unique opportunity they have. I wish they would buy Expo and embed it into the platform and let everyone customize every app on their phone. Let everybody build their own overlays, build their own voice to text, build their own whatever they want. If Android was to be treated less like iOS and more like Chrome, we could live in a different world than we do today. But we don't, because Android isn't trying to be good. It's not trying to be Google's. It's trying to be B-tier iOS. And you know what? They succeeded. That's all it is. And every major Android update just feels more like a bad iPhone than before. And a lot of the things they copied were for the better. Like the navigation system they stole from iOS is way better than the old back button. I'll fight you Android people on that. It's so much easier to navigate. It makes so much more sense, even if the apps haven't been updated accordingly, because the apps never get updated because nobody cares about Android apps. They don't make any money. Android is a shit show necessarily, and I don't think that will ever change. That said, I'm working on my own slop fork of Android that'll allow the types of customization I'm looking for. I don't think it'll go anywhere, but I'm just doing it out of curiosity at this point because anything is better than the shit show we live in today. So what could things look like? What would the future be like if we could actually do the things we should be able? I want to talk briefly about the what if. Imagine a world where a 10-year-old who just got their first iPad could also build iPad apps. Imagine a world where once they build that app on their iPad, they can share it with their friends. Imagine a world where somebody could customize their iPad and the way it interacts based on their specific needs or possibly their disabilities. Imagine a world where instead of Siri as the only option, we could have ChatGPT, Claude, and maybe even Gemini as options that have the same level of OS primitive access and control. Imagine a world where keyboards aren't forced to only use 50 megabytes of RAM and connect to other things. Imagine a world like the one that Steve Jobs promised us all the way back, where you don't even need an SDK to get started, where you could build an app and access everything your device is capable of without needing Apple's permission to do stuff. Imagine a world as creative and exciting as Steve Jobs imagined it. Imagine a world like the one Steve Jobs promised in his first discussion of apps on the iPhone. Imagine how much cooler software could be today. Maybe we wouldn't all just rotate between the same 4 apps all day. Maybe we wouldn't all just live in YouTube and Twitter and Gmail. Maybe, just maybe someday, we'll see a world where our phones are somewhat customizable, maybe even half of what our computers can do. But sadly, we don't live in that world today. We live in a world where all the cool shit happens on computers, and the coolest thing you could do on your phone right now is send a message to a computer so it can go do real work. It's so hard to imagine this world that when I tried to do my Android slop fork where I could bundle apps itself, even an AI as powerful as Fable couldn't imagine it and just couldn't figure out what I was asking for. It kept trying to figure out where the server would run and eventually concluded that it could virtualize Linux in order to do the build on my device. Because the world I'm imagining here is so different from reality that even the best AI in the world can't imagine what I'm thinking of. But do you know what I'm thinking of? I'm just thinking of my Mac. I'm just thinking of Linux. I'm just thinking of my Windows computer. I'm not thinking that far out. I'm not asking for infinite customization. I'm not asking for infinite control. I'm asking for Apple to stop treating the fucking iPhone like a BlackBerry from 2004. I want a device that I could install software on myself. I want a device that I can talk to with a system I chose. I want a device that can be used for things other than Apple's blessed categories because the device is too powerful and too useful and too much in my life and in my pocket for it to be so goddamn restricted. In many ways, my iPhone is the most magical device I've ever owned. It's unbelievable what it's capable of. On a thing that small in my pocket, it can do almost anything. It's a shame Apple lets you touch a third of those things at best. And John Turnus, the new CEO of Apple, your heart's in the right place. You care more about hardware and reliability than you care about profitability. Tim Cook had one job: maximize margins. And he did it so goddamn well, he took Apple from a failing company just barely surviving on the iPod and iPhone to one of the most valuable companies in the world. Briefly, the most valuable company in the world. If you guys don't fix this, you're not going to be able to hold your position there. But you still have this insane lead in hardware. Let the hardware win. It always was going to, and you know that, and you're going to ensure that. Since the hardware division is guaranteed to be successful, let software experiment a bit. Just a little. Let me install apps without getting permission. Let me build an iPad app on my iPad. Let the children cook. Let the next generation invent the next generation. Don't prescribe the way BlackBerries worked in 2004 to the children that don't know what a BlackBerry is. Most kids will never experience the ability to install an app or customize it outside of the App Store until they get their first MacBook or Windows computer in their late teens to early 20s. The lock-in on iOS is no longer just locking down the platform. It's locking down the brains of these kids. They don't know how to think outside of the box because you've made the walls too stiff. They're too opaque. They don't see outside of it anymore. Fix this before we die off, or the next generation will never realize software can be changed. Because the world they live in is a world where software is done the way the software is done. And that's not the world I want to live in. I'm excited for a future where the kids make their own apps, build their own experiences, invent their own games, share their own worlds with their friends. And you stand between us and that world. Apple's the only thing preventing this from happening. And I really fucking hope they stop. Because the impact is no longer just iOS. The impact is generational. And the kids don't know what files are anymore. They certainly don't understand that they can build their own software. Fix it now before it's too late. It might already be. I knew I had feelings on this one, but holy shit. I've said all I have to. Hopefully you know this video is sincere, because this is a thing that I've been concerned about for a long time, and the severity of it has been raising in my head the more I talk to the next generation and realize how much Apple's corrupted their brains with their bullshit. I don't think they'll fix it. It might already be too late. This might have been a useless rant, but I had to get it out of myself. I hope that you guys heard what I had to say here and that you actually understand what I'm trying to get out of me. I don't want to live in a world where software can't be changed. And I hope that maybe one of you guys might buy one of your kids a Linux computer at a young enough age to actually use it for cool things, and that you can get them excited about software being malleable instead of tired of software being locked in. The web I used to explore has been replaced by apps that are super locked down. The operating systems that I used to customize have been replaced with ones that I can't even install apps on without Apple's permission. The devices I used went from absolute shit shows that needed to be tethered to a wall to unbelievable generation-defining hardware that can run for days without needing a charge, that can only do the things Apple allows. And every time a law changes in a way that it might benefit us as Apple users, you guys go out of your way to make sure it can't. This is going to hurt the next generation in ways I can't even fathom, and I'm already seeing it play out today. Hopefully you guys will make sure this doesn't happen, because I don't trust Apple to do it. In fact, I don't trust Apple at all anymore. The moment I can finally get good photo and video editing software on Linux, I might finally retire this guy. Except for the fact that I need it to build iPhone apps, which is why we end up here again. I'm done. I have nothing else to say. I'm sorry I don't have a better message to end this one on. Hug your loved ones and buy them a Linux computer. It's the only choice we have. Until next time, keep fighting.